Okay, hi everyone, SmithyQ from SmithyQ.com, and welcome to the opening survey, where I'm going to go through all the various openings, talking about the ideas and plans behind them, some of the typical maneuvers, and so on and so forth. And to get started, let's try the impossible. Let's see if I can talk about the e4, e5 openings. In truth, this really isn't an opening yet. The opening would be determined by what both sides do from here. Right now, it's just the open games. It's the start. But there is an extremely important generality that we can derive from here, which can help us understand all the openings that start from this first move. And it really comes down to whether white is playing a fast d4 or not. Because if he does, it leads to a very different type of flavor of position, if you will, than if you were to be more restrained to play something else. We can kind of see this actually, because after d4, take, if we just look at this position, we could see that it's very easy for white to bring all of his pieces out and then castle in either direction. In fact, it only takes one move to move every single piece. Sorry, one move to move each piece. And then he's going to castle, and that's it. So he doesn't need to spend time with his pawns. No pawn moves necessary, it's all about the pieces. And that's really what the flavor of this position is. It's piece play. The pieces dominate. If you've studied a beginner book where they talk about basic opening principles, where you want to develop and move each piece once and fight for the center, so on and so forth, that works incredibly well in these types of positions because it's all about the pieces. Nothing else really matters. It's not time for pawn moves. And that really tells us what black needs to do. Black doesn't have time to play, a6 or h6 or maybe, c6 and d5. No, because these are pawn moves. This is a waste of time, and white can develop very, very quickly. That's what black wants to do. He wants to be able to get all of his pieces out very quickly. So he doesn't want to play c6, and he wants to play knight c6, attack the queen. And then he can play knight f6, maybe like bishop, b4. He's going to castle, probably play d6, get this bishop out. And the focus on every single turn is trying to get the pieces out. Because in these type of positions, the pieces dominate. It's all about the pieces. And perhaps this idea will be more intuitive if we see that if instead of taking with the queen, we're to play a gambit. I believe this is called the Goring Gambit, in which instead of taking, again, he's taking with this knight, white is offered a pawn. And what's the purpose of a gambit? It's to get open lines, very fast development, and to start the attack, right? And so that's what white's going to do here, is that white is going to bring all of his pieces out very, very quickly, and then likely launch some sort of attack against the black king. White is going to try and develop faster than black. Maybe black will waste some time, and then white is going to jump in, try and capitalize that way. Because it's all about the pieces. And how should black respond? Again, black should not be thinking about playing moves like a6, c6. No. Again, it's the wrong focus, because it'd be the wrong flavor of position, right? It's about the pieces. He needs to get his pieces out as quickly as possible. He has to catch up in development, because otherwise white's initiative will run him over. And this is, again, true not just with d4, but whenever white plays d4. For instance, we have the Scotch, where white could either take with the knight, or he could just play the Scotch Gambit with bishop c4. In either case, this is going to be an opening in which it's going to be focusing on the pieces, in which both sides need to be developing their pieces as fast as possible. And it's also true in, let's say, we look at this, the Italian game, which I believe is the most popular opening at amateur level. Which again, white can play this d4 idea, where it's not a gambit, because it's controlled by, not controlled, it's supported by c3 there. If we look at the old main line, take and take, reach a position like this, and if we're just to freeze for a second, we could see if we're white to move, white would be just doing amazing. Look, he has complete control of the center, he has 3 pieces developed, what's not to like? Black has only 2 pieces developed. Black doesn't have any control of the center. It's a dream position. But fortunately for Black, it's Black to move, and he has a chance to fight back. And again, this is the perhaps most important motif or move to remember in these types of positions, especially when White plays a very fast d4. Often Black should be focusing on, can he play d5? If Black does not play d5, if you were to play d6, or if you were to castle, or he do something else, it's too slow. White's center can start pushing Black back. Let's see, arrows, there we go. And Black's pieces are going to be pushed away. And that's not what you want when the game is all about the pieces. The last thing you want is your pieces to be knocked back and be pushed further behind. No, no, no. You want to fight back. So that's where d5 comes in. And if we were to look at this position, all of a sudden, this knight is the best piece on the board. It's in front of an isolated pawn. It's blocking this bishop from attacking f7. It can easily be supported by other pieces, say. And so the knight is absolutely great. White can't really chase it away. The knight anchors his position. And more importantly, it destroyed White's grip on the center, and it lets Black simply complete his development in peace. He doesn't need to move. He doesn't need to make any more pawn moves. He just develop his bishop, castle his king, move the queen, bring the rooks in, and that's it. And same thing for White. He's going to castle, move the queen, bring the rooks in. There's no more pawn moves because it's all about the pieces. And that's correct. That's what we should be doing in this type of position, is the focus is on the pieces. And this is really useful to know because it can help guide you to make decisions. Or it can help give you ideas. For instance, in this opening, the Italian, sometimes, more so at amateur level than, in a professional master database, you'll see this move, h6. Why? This is because many Black players, they like to play with knight f6, but they're scared, or, they don't want to face this knight g5, the so-called fried liver attack, for some reason. I'm not sure why it's called that. Which leads to some, it can lead to some pretty crazy complications, especially if Black allows it. And so sometimes, instead of doing that, they'll play h6, with the idea of playing knight f6 next, and then they'll keep going and doing normal things. But look at this. This is a pawn move that doesn't help development. It's not about pieces. And White would have the option now of playing d4, offering a pawn. And look what's happened. He's transformed the position into the flavor of very active piece play. Look, he already has 3 pieces developed, open lines, he's ready to castle. And Black has played h6. If we're to back up, let's imagine if instead of, in this type of position, d4, take, c3, take, Black would never play h6. It's such a loss of time. It's terrible. And after bishop c4, it leads to the exact same position. So this is what I mean, where if you understand the flavor of the position, or you can, it can give you ideas of how to transform the position to one that you want. If you can see your opponent is making a move that doesn't fit with this open center, well, then you open the center. You play d4 really, really quickly. Even you sacrifice a pawn. Why not? Because your opponent made a move that he wouldn't want to make in this type of position. I really like these types of positions with the fast d4. They're by far my favorite. And in fact, this opening right here with knight f3, knight c6, d4. It's still the opening I play. It's the most played opening I've ever played. I think it's fun, it's simple, and again, all you have to really know is move your pieces, get your pieces out. And many times I see my opponents, especially at lower levels, is they'll make pawn moves, or they'll not that. I've never seen that. Yes. And where this bishop sucks for it's staring at a pawn, and it's not very good. And in opening where it's all about getting the pieces as active and on the best squares as possible, this is kind of the worst square for this bishop. Right? And so fast d4 works really nicely. Now that said, that isn't the only way of playing these types of positions. And white has another option. And that would be, in positions like this, instead of playing d4, to play d3, which leads to a very different type of position. It's going to be it's going to be slower, and generally more positional / strategic. And often, whereas with the fast d4, it was all about the pieces, very often it's all about the pawns. The c-pawn in particular plays a very large role because the c-pawn helps support an eventual d4. It also helps this b4 and eventually a5 to come in. For instance, we can actually see that right here. This is very common. White is simply trying to gain some space over here on the queen side, trying to harass black's pieces. Black can hit back with a6, maybe he can hit back with a5 at times as well, just to give his bishops another square to move to. I think a6 is more common. Let's just look at some castle. So in these types of positions, it becomes much more maneuvering based. And both sides are trying to find the best time to play one of their pawn breaks. So that would be either d4 and or f4 for white, whereas black wants to, very rarely does he play f5. It happens sometimes, but come on. Aha! d5 is often black's main idea. And in order to get that, there's a very typical maneuver that black will usually do in this type of position. Is where he'll move this knight away. Notice how the d6 pawn is here, which defends this pawn. So the knight is free to move. And by moving the knight, this now frees this pawn. So that way, actually, let me just do something like this. White often has a similar maneuver where he'll bring his knight here. Let's look at something like this, where we can see by playing c6, black is supporting the eventual d5. Also, his bishop can come back here, and maybe it's eyeing towards the king side, maybe. Or, by moving the bishop, it will also allow maybe b5 at some point, where the pawns can move. White has something very similar. He can always throw his bishop back and come not there, but here, which would aim at the king side. But this bishop is on a very nice diagonal, so often it stays here as well. Come on, chess base. Why are you doing this? Sorry. And so in these types of positions, it's about trying to maneuver your pieces in such a way which you're slowly improving your position, but you're also ready. Maybe you want to play d4 at a certain point, or b5, or a5, or you move the knight and play f4, what have you. It's about arranging one of these pawn breaks. At the same time, you have to always watch your opponent, because if white's not careful, if white's just doing whatever, black can strike back with d5, take over the center, and all of a sudden white will just be pushed, potentially right off the board. These positions are much more difficult to play in that they require more patience, often more chess knowledge. You need to make decisions, here on move 12 that might not be fully felt until move, 32. Much harder to play. I'm not very good at these, in all honesty, which is probably why I like playing the fast d4. But that is the general strategical ideas, is you're trying to maneuver your pieces in such a way, that way you're both ready to play your own pawn breaks, but you're also ready to counter if your opponent does the same. Just one last thing to note is that when white plays a slow d3, often black doesn't want to hit back with d5. It's not losing or anything. Whoops. Okay, it is if you play bishop f5. But in positions like this, often black can get into some annoying pressure. For instance, white's going to castle. I'll just put it on the board, actually. He'll play rook e1, we're attacking here, the bishop can always go over to b5, or threatening the knight, which is defending the pawn, and this pawn can be a weakness. And in practice, certainly when I've tried this as black, is that d5 was premature. It was too fast, and it just gives white a chance to attack our weaknesses. It didn't really free black from what he wants to do. And similarly, I've tried this a few times as white, where I've often gotten a nice position, where I'm able to just pressure very, very easily, and black is really stuck passive trying to defend. Imagine if black is forced to play f6, it's just a huge weakness. Now all of a sudden d4 can come and blowing things open, and things aren't very good. So this is why often if white is not hitting the center right away, is we don't want to hit the center right away either. That's a typical idea for black, at least. Again, you're not forced to do that. Again, you'll find grandmaster games in which they do play this. You have to be very careful if that is what you're trying to do. Often, the more restrained approach with d6 is the prudent thing to do, and then going forward from there. Again, the main idea for black would be to eventually reroute this knight to play c6, then usually a d5 after that. So, in general, that is the e4, e5 opening, in which either white is going to play it really fast in the center, usually with d4, and it's going to be piece play, or it's going to be more slow and controlled, strategic, restrained, like this. I know I only touched on these knight f3 openings, but it's also true for the other openings. For example, in the King's Gambit. Sorry, let's just do this. Generally, white is playing a really fast d4. What does that mean? It means its piece play is going to dominate. It's all about the pieces. And often when black gets in trouble is when he tries to get too cute by playing, g5 and h5 and too many unnecessary pawn moves. I think g5 is actually the main line. It doesn't matter. It's the more pawn moves black makes, the more danger he often gets. Whereas, instead, if you were to hit back with d5, where he simply opens it up, look at this. Again, all of his pieces can come out in just one move. Once he gets rid of this pawn, he can come to knight c6 and castle, and then things are great. He has an easy game, and that should be his focus, right? On getting his pieces. If white is going to try and go in the center quick, then black should do the same and get his pieces out. And it's true with, the bishop's opening, in which white is playing more slow and restrained. Generally, black should do the same. He should probably shouldn't play a fast d5. Maybe he can. There's this, let's see if I remember, there's this idea by playing c6 to support it and then playing d5. That might make some sense, but simply playing nice and simple, with d6 and then slowly trying to eventually get d5 after you finish development also makes perfect sense. So again, the two flavors of positions. There are fast, open, lots of piece play, or the slower, more controlled, and often it's the pawn play. At any point, the two could mix. Not so much piece play into pawn play, but the pawn play could eventually open up. You can imagine a position like this, all of a sudden f5, and then f4, and then d4, and things have opened up very, very quickly. So, before I ramble on any longer, that is the general flavor, the general ideas of these e4, e5 openings with some of the most important maneuvers. And if you were to look through some master games or an opening textbook, and you're generally going to see this, or maybe you won't. Keep an eye for it. See if the lines recommended, or the games that masters play, when they play d3 and d6, is it more slower? Do you see more of the pawns being moved? Or when you see the really fast d4s, does it then become more of a piece game where the pieces are doing most of it? Keep an eye out for that. because once you see these ideas in action, that's when they can start really making sense. Anyway, that's that. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave me comments, feedback. I'd love to hear it. And in the coming days, I'll be, again, doing more and more openings, and hope this will be a lot of fun. Okay, so SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. I'll just, quick shout out on Chessable. I've got my opening course. It's either out or it's about to come out. So take a look at that, Smithy's Opening Fundamentals. I'll have a link as soon as it's ready. It's free. So I can't say much more than that. Check that out. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.